We will give it a moment to make sure everyone gets into the breakout session. Glad to see you here. We're always worried that it's like having a party and worried that no one's going to show up. So we're glad that the number is rising. Good to see everyone. All right, looks like the increase in numbers has paused. And good morning. Thank you for joining us for our breakout session, Intentional Design of System-Wide Inclusive Cultures, Policies, and Practices. My name is Kevin Schaefer, Director of the Supporting Innovative Practices Project. And we wanted to point out that we have a tiny URL on the slide, and we'll put it in the chat for you to access the slides. Many of the links are live to the resources and websites that we'll be referring to. And we've also created a QR code that if you are viewing on your phone, that will give you access that you can then download when you get to your computer. So again, welcome. And I'd like to just take a moment and introduce our team of presenters today. Rachel?
Good morning. I'm Rachel Favre. I'm a Director of School and District Support at the Santa Barbara County Education Office, and happy to be here this morning.
Joe.
And I'm Joe Dana, Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services with the Orcutt Union School District, which is in northern Santa Barbara County.
Good morning. My name is Sean Carey. I am in the same role as Rachel at the Santa Barbara County Education Office.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Leah Padilla. I'm a coordinator with the Open Access Project, and I am out of the Placer County SELPA.
Great. So to get us started, I just wanted to give an overview, not only of our project, but exactly what we're going to be talking about today. So today's session really tells the story of partnership, purpose, and progress. The intentional design of inclusive systems through collaboration across the California statewide system of support. In Santa Barbara County, the foundation for this work was already in motion. The SELPA and county office had been deeply engaged in conversations about belonging, equity, and the lived experiences of students with disabilities. And districts like Orcutt Unified were leading with heart, building cultures centered on relationships and inclusion. When the Supporting Innovative Practices Project and Open Access joined this effort, our role was not to direct or redefine, but to come alongside, to listen, to amplify, and to align resources that could strengthen what was already taking root. The Inclusion Inquiry Network, now the Inclusion Network, which you'll hear more about shortly, grew out of that shared moral purpose, providing time, conditions, and support for district teams to examine their systems, beliefs, and practices through the lens of belonging and rightful presence. What you'll see and hear today reflects a model of true partnership across technical assistance providers, Santa Barbara County Education Office, the SELPA, SIP, and Open Access, as well as local district leadership, all working together to move from compliance to culture, from systems of placement to systems of belonging. And most importantly, it demonstrates that sustainable change begins when we honor the work already at play and build capacity from within. And we thought we would start with just a quick overview of the two California System of Support technical assistance projects that you'll be hearing more about in the presentation. So as I mentioned, I'm the director of the Supporting Innovative Practices Project, or SIP, out of El Dorado County Office of Education and in partnership with Riverside County Office of Education. We are funded by the California Department of Education, Special Education Division, and what you see on the screen is our mission and our vision. We are not only charged with increasing least restrictive environment opportunities for students with disabilities, but also to ensure those least restrictive environments are rooted in a sense of meaningful inclusion, relationship, and community. We're focused on the human dignity of inclusion and connectedness of students with disabilities with their non-disabled peers. And if we go to the next slide, I just wanted to go over really quickly how we deliver our support across California in a three-tier model. Tier one is access for any district, any county, any SELPA, any classroom, any school site to access our resources at no cost. So you can see our website is sipimpact.org. We're on social media. We also publish the Special Edge newsletter, as well as podcasts and statewide events that anyone in California can attend. We also provide support at Tier 2 to over 100 districts, county offices, and SELPAs across California, and they receive personalized professional development. We strategize with their leadership teams, and they also receive grant funding to do this work. And then Tier 3, we have districts that are assigned to our project through the compliance and improvement monitoring process, who are focused specifically on increasing inclusive opportunities or least restrictive environments with students with disabilities. And then you can also access our SIP overview one-pager if you'd like more information on the project. Leah?
All right, and then a little bit about open access. We are one of the statewide special education resource leads, and we are grounded in the foundational belief that with access to quality curriculum and instruction, all students can engage, actively participate, and learn with inclusive settings. And what makes our project unique is that we say we are where we're all things access. So we focus on universal design for learning, assistive technology, and augmentative alternative communication. And similar to SIP, we also have 3 tiers of support. So we have our universal supports, which include our website, as well as a wide range of offerings. And we also have a presence on social media. So we encourage you to check out our website. We provide targeted supports, which include coaching and training on the implementation of universal design for learning, assistive technology, and augmentative alternative communication for those districts who want to increase access for students. And then we also have intensive supports where we are a technical assistance provider for districts across the state, where we support them with their compliance and improvement monitoring process. And then our ultimate goal at Open Access is to create showcase sites. So places where you can go and see access in action. So we have UDL, AT, and AAC showcase sites across the state. On the slides, you'll see our one-pager. So please take a look at that and let us know if you have any questions.
And we'll turn it over to Rachel to tell the story.
Great, thank you. So you're gonna get a little origin story of how some of our efforts really initiated and led to this real coming together of different entities, agencies, and all in support of districts in our county and one district in particular. So in 2017 and 18, our county office runs our teacher induction program, and there were surveys that came out from special education teachers who were in the program. And those surveys identified a real disconnect between the teaching, the practice that they got in their teacher preparation programs around inclusion, these are best practices, to sort of the current reality of being in and employed in the school districts throughout the county. So there was this disconnect between we're saying this is supposed to be the thing, but we're not yet seeing it in districts. And they were finding a lot of challenge with sort of leading the charge as individuals as opposed to kind of coming together as a system. At the same time, we had our first California School Dashboard released in 2017, and it was very clear that students with disabilities were a student group across the county that really needed support. And so in the process of kind of defining how that support might come together, we had the opportunity to collaborate with our SELPA. So we have one SELPA in our county, which I know is different across the state, but we had a great relationship with that SELPA and really made a commitment to work together to take this on, and however that might happen through the different kinds of support that we were offering. So in 2019 and into 2020, we crafted a group called the Inclusion Inquiry Network. And what we were really intending with this group was to start with kind of what is the current state of inclusion and inclusive practices within our county? How are the students in our county that have disabilities experiencing education? And really kind of taking some time to examine the history of these two systems that were developed, kind of separate from each other, and yet we're trying to bring them together in a certain way. So we had a lot of time to really focus on inquiry and the importance of that inquiry leading to action. Of course, in the spring of 2020, we had to halt our gatherings, and we really shifted our focus from this inquiry into some of that triage focus, making sure that our districts were being supported in the ways that they needed during the pandemic. And then in 2022, when the dashboard came out again, and Lee, if you can go to the next slide, we saw again that those outcomes for students with disabilities were still, really at a point of needing support. And so we got back together with our SELPA and said, all right, we think it's time to come back together and think about how we might reignite the Inclusion Inquiry Network. But there was a lot that happened during the pandemic that really put students with disabilities and the experiences of those students kind of at the front of a lot of our district's minds. And so we said, we think we're ready to move from inquiry to more of action. And the executive director of the SELP at the time, Dr. Ray Avila, said, I just saw Kevin Schaefer present. Maybe we could reach out to him for some support. And so we were able to do that. Kevin was, enthusiastic in joining us, and this has turned into what is now, is going to be our third year of this network. So in 23-24, we launched the first year of our inclusion network. And so on the next slide, this is our vision. This is really our driving intention and our purpose. And the network really, as Kevin mentioned before, it's really about connecting content with the time and conditions for district teams to really dig into, wrestle with, have time reflecting on their own systems and making connections for them to build their inclusive practices within their districts. So we didn't start with this vision. This is something that came together through the work that we did through those first couple of sessions that we had. But it has continued to be where we kind of come back to and think about, are we doing this? Are we really creating opportunities for LEAs to think about designing those environments that are rooted in belonging, relationship, and community for all students. And so on the next slide, we, how did we do this and who did we get to come to the table was a big topic of conversation when we first started. We found it to be really important that the right people were in the room. So this idea that, it wasn't going to be a time for special education leaders to come together and figure this out, that there really needed to be an engagement on the general education side, and a more comprehensive district-wide engagement for this. So we crafted a recruitment plan that started with really a plea, a sharing of data and kind of outcomes with our county superintendents, and an ask for them to be committed to engaging in this process of this network. And that proved to be really fruitful and important in the work. And to this day, they are continuing in that commitment. And so we saw some great engagement on that side. And then the other side is this partnership approach. So we knew as the county office, this wasn't something that we could do alone. We needed a lot of voices in the room and in the space. And we're so thankful to be able to lean on the expertise of SIP. And we also had SIL as a part of some of our sessions, and open access and our SELPA to be a part of that process. And so in terms of how we did this, we approached this through a meeting structure of meeting 3 times a year as a network. And I think what was really important and impactful was that we had opportunity for teams to engage in some content, but then we really made space for team time, and offered some coaching in between sessions. So there was this sort of continuous engagement in the content and in those relationships in the network throughout the year. And in terms of content, we also framed a lot of the content around a couple of frameworks. So this is really big work and can feel intimidating. And Kevin's going to share a little bit about how we've used those frameworks to help districts really focus their planning and implementation.
Yeah, so if you look at the triangles, I don't know what it is about pyramids or triangles, but we used both as part of our framework. The Booth and Ainscow research around inclusion, it's called the Index for Inclusion. It's really the basis of our project. And we've also used it as the basis of the Inclusion Network. So as Rachel said, this idea of in the center, we have shared leadership. We made sure that this was not a special education focused initiative. And we were very mindful in who was at the table. District leadership with decision-making capital, site leadership, educators, related service staff, so that we could get a view of each LEA. In order to create an impactful plan, they had to consider what plans are already in place, LCAP, strategic plans, SIPSAs, SIM plans, and bring those to the table, as well as the initiatives and the priorities that were already at play, and who else they were working with as TA projects, so that we weren't creating bifurcation or adjacent plans that then become something separate and different through implementation. So the shared leadership was critical, and we required a commitment across all 3 sessions. Session 1, beginning with inclusive culture. We talked about ableism. We talked about rightful present. We talked about what it means to be an ally in the creation of their plans. And then in session 2, where we brought in the system improvement leads, we focused on policy and data, where they were really looking at the data for students with disabilities through the California dashboard, through their annual performance indicators, through their local data, to continue to refine their plans. And then our last session is around inclusive practices, where we brought in 6 to 9 technical assistance providers, so that the LEA teams knew what was available, and they could also reach out to resources as well as technical assistance after year 1 of the Inclusion Academy. In the creation of their implementation plans, we use the Culture Partners results pyramid. And really simply, You'll see at the top of the pyramid, the teams would look at their results or their data, and then they would determine what their desired results are, and they would create a measurable, meaningful, memorable outcome. And then they would talk about what actions needed to be in place in order to reach those desired results. And then we went into the belief system that influences the actions, that determines whether or not we're going to get to our results. And then finally, the experiences that each team needed to create to change their belief system around disability and ableism and bring the implicitness of ableism to the surface that would then influence the actions that would get us to the results on increasing inclusive opportunities. So we have the overarching framework, which is the Index for Inclusion, and then the creation of their storyboards followed exactly with that results pyramid. And feel free to put any questions in the chat or use the Q&A.
So you've heard a little bit about the design and the approach and how did it go? So in our first year, we saw a very highly engaged participation in the network. We had 14 districts and charters, and our county has 20 districts and 15 charters. So we saw a really nice sample of LEAs in our network, over 100 registered participants. When we launched into the second year of the network, we wanted to make sure that we could also incorporate those who hadn't been with us in the first year. So we launched a boot camp and provided, sort of a enough to get those new team members or potentially new LEAs sort of up to speed and ready to join the network where we were when we started in that second year. And we had 5 LEAs reach out for coaching, and Leah's going to talk a little bit about how some of that has, resulted in additional support for LEAs throughout the county. So we continue to see a high rate of participation. What I'll say is that a lot of, not a lot, but a handful of the LEAs have done some rethinking about those who are participating and have really started to focus in on a consistent team that really had where there was representation of sort of decisional capital in the system, because the things that we're talking about really take some ability to make some big shifts and influence the system at large. So having those varied voices in the room, they found to be really important. On the other side, in terms of impact, we surveyed participants as you do, and found that at the end of year one, almost half of the participants identified a focus on UDL as their highest priority. And so through that, when we started planning year two, we really said, okay, UDL just keeps coming up and there's a clear need here. How do we start to bring some of that into the network with some real intention? And again, Leah's going to talk a little bit about how we had that created that partnership and are providing some of that still even this year. And I would say generally, we're seeing sort of broad increases in co-teaching, interests in co-teaching and collaborative partnerships, changes to some of the structures that are present in schools and in districts. And I would even say there's a different language that people are using when they're talking about inclusion and inclusive practices, and how we're starting to see that shift away from that's a project or a thing that special education is really responsible to, a real ownership by the entire system of we need to take this on as a team and as a district. And so again, year two, we continued in 24-25 with that same structure, continuing to build on those frameworks that Kevin explained. And with that UDL focus, we said, we need open access. We need their support. So they have been partners of ours through year 2 and are continuing to partner with us in year 3. And the approach that we're taking to UDL is that which Open Access puts forward, which is that it is an equity-based whole system transformation. And so that work is in progress, and we are continuing to build on where we've been in the years past and doing all that work around culture and beliefs, and then how that actually works and what it looks like in terms of practice and policy, the structures that we're putting forward in our LEAs. And so I'll turn it over to Leah to talk a little bit more about how we've approached that.
Thanks, Rachel. So we were super excited when we were asked to join year 2 of the Inclusion Network. And we came in and just we thought about what do people need with implementation of universal design for learning, and really started to focus on those actions. So our scope and sequence, we wanted to start with just that clear understanding of what is universal design for learning. So we discussed foundational concepts, variability, and barriers. We got into the 3 principles of universal design for learning. And our focus was that implementation science. So making sure that this implementation is going to be able to be sustainable. And we had, like Rachel said, lots of time for teams to work together and really talk about what does this implementation look like in our context. So great conversations were happening, and time to really look at their policies and practices, and then the creation of implementation plans, those actionable steps that districts could work toward before the next time that we met. And linked there is also just an overview, more detailed, of what that scope and sequence looked like. And then each time after our sessions, like Rachel said, we asked for feedback. And what came out of that is there were districts who were interested in additional coaching support and additional training within their districts. So we were able to connect with those districts and really meet their contextual needs, because we know there are many barriers that are out there as we're implementing. So that helped to address some of those barriers and remove them. And then we were able to have time for that coaching piece to ensure that sustainable implementation. And we've been able to support that student impact piece, where we have instructional rounds happening, classroom walkthroughs, and being able to see that evidence of UDL in action. And so this year, we're really focusing on that implementation, active implementation. So focusing on those teams, like Rachel said, do we have the right people here at the Inclusion Network? And continuing to have those discussions and inviting others in if maybe we're missing some voices from certain people that need to be there. We're focusing on that data collection piece and action steps, those implementation plans. And there's a focus this year on networked communities. So really meeting the needs of what the individuals want to go deeper into. So there's time to look at co-teaching and collaborative partnerships, looking at master scheduling. And it's great because districts are able to hear from others and see what's working, how they're minimizing some of those barriers that come up. And then also mindset is always a conversation that is continuing. How do we continue to shift mindsets? And then PLCs and lesson planning is another topic. And then also just deeper into UDL implementation, how we can continue to move that work forward. So that is the focus of year 3 of the Inclusion Network.
And Leah, if I might add, I just want everybody to really see the process of how this began with an initiative from the Santa Barbara County Education Office in SELPA based on the data that they've been receiving from their LEAs in the county, and then bringing in SIP to design a big picture initiative to address that need, but also understanding from the SIP's perspective where our lane is. So we knew when we had finished year 1, moving into UDL implementation, or a need that had arisen from year 1 around UDL, transferring facilitation over to open access to do the work that their expertise in. And then how that has progressed over the years, it's been planned based on what we've learned, but it's also iterative. And that county and that SELPA relationship has been critical because the SELPA is working with many of the districts on their compliance and improvement monitoring process or plan. And the county is working on the same student population through the differentiated assistance. So we really wanted the Inclusion Network to bring together the county and the SELPA to build capacity and alignment to integrate the work that they're doing with their LEAs around students with disabilities, but then also using the data from their LEAs to then go back up the system to then inform the county and the SELPA and the TA projects on what the LEAs have identified as their needs to continue that design. So it is individualized, personalized support down the system and back up the system. And then if you go to the next slide, at the same time, Joe Dana from Orcutt Union School District had reached out for support in the work that they were doing around inclusion and equity. So this is happening now at the same time. The Inclusion Inquiry Network and the Inclusion Network was happening at the county and the SELPA level. So Joe, I will turn it over to you from a district perspective on how this work began.
Thank you, Kevin. So let me just begin with a little bit of background about our school district. As I said earlier, we're in northern Santa Barbara County, just south of the city of Santa Maria. We have 5,000 students, TK through 12, and we do have shifting demographics. Our area of Orcutt 40, 50 years ago was really an Anglo middle class bedroom community for Vandenberg Air Force Base then, now Space Force Base. But now our community is changing quite a bit. We are seeing our demographics become much more diverse to the point where our unduplicated count is now around 66, 67%. So we're changing. Our district has had a long-standing interest in inclusive practices and what we can do for students with disabilities. When I was a teacher many years ago, back in the early 90s, I actually did participate in co-teaching in my 5th grade class. And I also had a son with autism who went through our program. And so, we've had a long interest in that. If we could go to the previous slide, I want to talk about that event that you see a picture of. So after COVID, we wanted to reset what we were doing with inclusive practices, and we found out about Kevin Schaefer and SIP, and we actually brought our core management team to Sacramento to work with Kevin on a 2-day retreat. The first day was really more Kevin sharing with us about inclusive practices and about universal design for learning. The second day was more of a situation appraisal where we all basically took stock of where we are and then mapped out where we wanted to go. Now you can go to the next slide. And one of the things that we had on our action plan was to restart co-teaching, which had been happening in our district to a degree, but COVID kind of halted everything, and we wanted to get that rebooted. And concurrent to all this, our district is also in differentiated assistance for students, for the performance of students with disabilities. And so we're doing co-teaching, we're working with Kevin, we're in differentiated assistance, and we're working with our friends from the Santa Barbara County Education Office. And we began our DA work by doing some data walks, some deep dives into how kids are doing and all that. And we did that for a couple of years. But last year, we just felt like we needed to do something different. We were seeing that co-teaching, especially at our junior highs, was a little bit rocky. We also were seeing that we needed to improve outcomes for students with disabilities. And so we were basically brainstorming with our friends from SBCEO, Sean and Rachel, and Ray Avila at the time from SELPA. And we just thought, we need to do something that's going to be more authentic, more directly helpful for our staff and our school communities, something that is going to help us level up what we're doing. And so we came up with an innovative model for differentiated assistance. And I'm now going to turn it over to Sean from SBCEO to talk about that.
Thank you, Joe. Well, both Kevin and Joe mentioned partnership. And as has been said, one of our responsibilities at the county office is to support LEAs who are eligible for differentiated assistance. This is part of the California system of support. We've already heard Orchid had been eligible for differentiated assistance in prior cycles based on the outcomes for students with disabilities. So we had prior knowledge about lots of efforts that were already underway. And we wanted to be mindful of the precious limited capacity that LEA leaders and school systems have to undertake strategic change initiatives. So we were really focused on avoiding redundancy. And on the other hand, we also didn't want to compete with existing efforts. So through thoughtful conversations that the county office team brokered involving Joe from Orchid and Kevin from SIP and the director of SELPA, we all agreed and reinforced this shared desire to streamline efforts in order to optimize our coherence and our impact. And you can see that kind of described on this slide in the project proposal that features, the purpose and some goal statements associated with how DA manifested for Orchid. We discerned together that the best form for it to take would be to provide Orchid with a range of data, to help as a county office team to collect that data that would capture and allow us to deepen our understanding of the system. So these next slides will just show you sort of how that looked. This is a glimpse of our co-designed data collection project. You'll see as you look at it that there was a district level needs assessment that we conducted for district leaders, and we did that in alignment with SIP's inclusion blueprint. And then we focused on 3 identified sites and on 3 audiences at each one of those sites. So there were definitely commonalities. For example, all groups were surveyed and were surveyed on similar items, but we also had some variations, particularly in format. So for example, we administered the staff surveys in a group setting at staff meetings, and we were able to do empathy interviews for individual staff members. And then when it came to students and families, we facilitated focus groups. You can see there from the numbers on the slide, the total number of surveys and interviews that surveys administered and interviews conducted. Across all these research methods, we identified common elements for inquiry, but tailored our questions for the audiences and context so they would make most sense. And we were really wanting to ensure alignment between what we were collecting and then what we hoped ultimately to be able to report out meaningfully. So you'll see there that aligned design, we were mindful to align across groups, but also to articulate what we anticipated being the inputs and ultimately the outputs in any of our reporting. So speaking of reporting, the next slide is just a snapshot. It'll give you let's see, you can see the 4 elements to which our survey and interview questions were aligned. A, B, C, D there: rightful presence, vision, systems and structures, and instructional practices. So just, big buckets that the items tied to. And this bar graph here is showing you a display of survey respondents' ratings of specific statements. And this just makes those responses visible to us quantitatively across the elements and across the three audiences. This graph was pulled from a district level report. You see a snapshot of it there on the right. And that report synthesized the data that was collected at the 3 identified sites, but we also produced site-specific reports that contained both the quantitative information from the ratings and the surveys, as well as qualitative information and some high-level summaries. So this slide is a snapshot or a glimpse of the way our team summarized the qualitative data that was gathered. I'll let you just take a look at the element. In this case, the element of focus is instructional practices. And on the left is our summaries of what staff had to say qualitatively about instructional practices related to students with disabilities. And the right is a pulled quote from a staff member. Similarly, on the next slide, this is a summary of the qualitative data related to the instructional practices domain, but this is input from students and from families. So having these summaries that the county office provided in the reports for each of the 4 elements and for all 3 audiences proved really useful for identifying themes and trends. So for district leadership to be informed in this way from data that was gathered, very much at the grassroots level. And at the same time, it was the pulled quotes that really grabbed people's attention. You can kind of see how those became interesting discussion points as we went through and reviewed the reports. We intentionally did not include recommendations from our office for any next steps. It was really important to us that those be considered by ORCID's leaders and staff principally, and potentially with our involvement or in consultation with SELPA and with SIP. And fast forward to today, we're grateful to have been able to continue connecting with the team from ORCID as recently as last week. We do that regularly to, just check in, monitor progress, and to discern and enact any next steps, which is a great place for me to hand it back to Joe.
Hey, Sean, really quick, there's a question in the chat. How did the surveys differ from the interviews?
That's a great question. There was a lot of commonality. But our interview questions, if you are familiar with empathy interviews, they're so thoughtfully designed, those questions, to be really open-ended. So very similar topics, but the surveys would feature rating scales, it's from like strongly disagree to strongly agree, and that would get us at that quantitative data. And then what would happen so often in our empathy interviews and our focus groups is there'd be an open-ended question, and that would elicit lots of stories or anecdotes, or sometimes just really strong opinions. Gave voice to some of the opinions as opposed to just a rating of an opinion or a level of agreement with a particular statement.
Thank you. Joe, we'll turn it over to you
So
for next step.
yeah, so when we looked at the data collected by our friends from SBCEO, we saw some really good stuff. We also saw some things we can work on. We found that our students and parents felt real connected to school staff and valued the relationships that were in place. Um, we also found among all of our interest holders a very strong commitment to inclusive practices. Everybody there, no one was against the idea of doing more for students with exceptional needs. There was a strong commitment to that. But we also saw a big variation in how people defined what inclusion and inclusive practices are and should be. And meantime, we also heard a lot about behavior. We have been dealing as a district with a continuance of post-COVID severe behaviors, and particularly at our elementary sites. So we talked about what the best next step would be, and we thought, why don't we put together a roadshow with the findings from this data collection and define for folks what the district's vision is for inclusive practices to help get people more on the same page. And so we did that. And I actually am going to share our roadshow with you all if you'd like to take a look at it. I'm going to put it in the chat. And what has happened is our special education director, Christy Callahan, and I have gone around to every school site in our district to present this, to share with them, what the district's vision for inclusive practices is, to share the data that we got, and to address rumors and questions that staff have. And it's been very well received. In fact, Christy and I even have received applause from some sites, which is something we always love to have. Meanwhile, we also are continuing our work around co-teaching. We actually have reset some of our co-teaching teams this year to try to really get people who want to collaborate, want to be there. We've done that. We also are continuing to work with Kevin. Kevin, by the way, is a very dynamic and positive figure, and we certainly endorse him working with any school district in this state. We also are continuing professional development. We just had a professional development day on Monday of last week, and we had sessions on a number of things, but they included instructional accommodations, behavioral support, restorative practices. We have added counseling, psychologist, and behavior support. We're just continuing to work this issue around improving outcomes for students with disabilities. And I feel like we're arrow up, and I thank very, very heartfelt our friends from the County Education Office and SIP for their help.
Thank you, Joe. I know we're running a little bit short on time. Hopefully you were able to answer some or ask some questions in the chat that we could get to. Be sure to join us for our roundtable at 12:30. But I hope you feel through the screen the passion that everyone on this team has for this work, leaning in from the county SELPA level to the district level, and also filtering down to the classroom, the students, and the families. One of our areas that we focus on as a project is eliciting the voice of the disability community, which is exactly what the empathy interviews have done. Really bring the voice of the students and the families, and of course the teachers who are in their classrooms doing this work, and then designing the system around the needs with whom that we create these educational environments. So thank you, everyone, and thank you, team, for volunteering your time and being here. So if you have questions, please feel free to reach out, and we hope to talk soon.